leading with that, Dr. Arjendu, actually I'd like to ask you a question. One of the solutions or one of the new age thinking over the last few years has been opening up of liberal arts education because of the new paradigm that's happening with technology changing so quickly and actually robots taking over specialized and monotonous jobs, right? Humans are required to be a lot more wide array, know a lot more about everything and interdisciplinary. So I'd like you to kind of give us an insight from your liberal arts background.
Thank you. I love that quote of Heinlein's. I actually used it on my Facebook wall a few years ago, and my friends immediately started counting how many of them they could do, and no one really got above 75%. So it just shows you're not very unspecial. Especially the scholarship one, I think that's the hard one. So I am at a liberal arts college. Carleton College is uniformly rated in the top 5 or 7 liberal arts colleges in the United States, which pretty much invented the notion. So what is a liberal arts college? I'm a physicist. So it doesn't mean that a liberal arts college means you are, forgive me, a humanist. No. Yes. The point is that liberal arts is often conflated with the humanities. And actually, I'd like this moment to remind us of the notion of what liberal arts is. The liberal arts are that which every person who strives to be liberated or free should know. So it is important for you to live in a civic society to know all the liberal arts. That means, maybe not all 33 things that Heinlein lists in his beautiful quote, but you should at least be able to participate in a debate. You should be able to understand the point of a science policy that's being made. You should be able to appreciate music. You should be able to feel something about life. Music is not just about entertainment, but maybe about meaning. And think about the meaning of life or philosophy of having contemplated other religions other than your own. That's what liberal arts is about. And that's why I've been at Carleton now for 20 plus years, and I cannot tell you how fully, completely I've fallen for that model of liberal arts. I went to St. Stephen's, which pretends to be a liberal arts college, but all I learned was physics, chemistry, biology. I didn't learn biology, thank God. I only learned physics, chemistry, and maths because that's all I was good at. But the liberal arts education I got there was involuntary. It's from arguing with my econ friends in the evenings or going to the debate society. And what liberal arts education does is provide that for everyone. And there's many reasons we should do that, not least because you can't predict the future. And I'll give you one quick example to predict the future. I worked on something very esoteric in quantum foundations called quantum classical transition, and I've been doing this for 20 years. And I thought I was ruining my students' lives by teaching them this weird stuff. And they would go on and do PhDs, but then it wasn't my problem, then it was the PhD advisor's problem. Well, it turns out that quantum foundations are at the heart of what promises now to be the big breakthrough in cryptography, where every single transaction that you make online on your phone will now become suspect to quantum decoding. And so every corporation in the world is hiring people like my former students who suddenly are thanking me for, quote, ruining the lives of quantum mechanics. I couldn't have predicted it, they couldn't have predicted it, and no one could have predicted it that quantum mechanics was going to become what it did. And that's why you need to learn random stuff, because who knows what will become good. A. B. One of the proudest moments I've had recently is when my students helped install a water submersible pump on a farm outside Oroville. And what the water submersible pump does is when there is sunshine, it takes the water from the monsoon rain hole and puts it up on a high spot, and that changes the water flow of the, and then they can use that water during the droughts. So they pump the water up, so simultaneously getting energy and storage. This could be a problem we solved on a piece of paper in our classroom, but until they saw what it meant to human beings, and until they saw what it meant to the whole ecosystem of the farm, no one would have understood what it meant. I didn't understand what it meant until I saw what it did. And that was one of the most valuable lessons I could have taught myself and my students, because we simultaneously saw all the aspects of a single water cycle problem which could have been dismissed as a math equation in a class. And here it is a real human issue. So those are my two sort of plugs for the liberal arts. One is that it's fundamental. You can't not think about a civic society, you can't think about what's happening in the streets of India right now, and not think about what it means to be liberal in the true sense of the word liberated. And the second is, we can't train for specialization, we have to train for full human curiosity, learning to learn people, not just facts, which become outdated the moment you shut the book, basically. So, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Communication.
Yes.
One of the most critical skills in your personal life, professional life, anywhere you go. Especially in today's world where everyone's used to abbreviations and short bites of information. Leads to a lot of miscommunication, according to me. And what do you think, creating a writing center or a university, what do you think we should be doing that could help bridge that gap or help a student through the journey?
I guess I'll start out by giving a sort of brief introduction to what a writing and communication center is. I'd say at the majority of universities in the US and across Europe, you have what are generally called writing centers, but now more and more they're being identified as writing and communication centers. These are, in my own definition and what I see in my vision of a Center for Writing and Communication, is that it's a safe, and the importance there is on the word safe, a safe space for people to come, students, staff, faculty, outsiders, to come and improve the way they write, read, and communicate. And these are all sort of blanket terms, of course, but what happens in a Center for Writing and Communication is that a person comes in, let's say most typically it's a student, a university student, comes in with a draft of a paper that they have been assigned, and somehow this paper is loaded with these abbreviations and acronyms and things that they're using in text messages. Are they still called text messages? Yes. Are coming in with a piece of work, and not only that, they're coming in with a personality, with a personal life, with a history, with, you know, the notion of storytelling keeps coming up, with a story. And it's the job of the consultant or tutor in the Center for Writing and Communication to act in several roles. The first one being mentor. I have heard across several countries that the biggest concern for students in their writing, and I think we can say this applies to the general population, the general concern is confidence. The way a person represents themselves on paper, for instance, is in essence a person's representing of their own selves. And to look at writing in this way, and I'm talking about both creative writing and technical writing. So we can talk about a poem, and we can also talk about a business letter. In that writing is somebody's self-representation, whether they refer directly to themselves or not. And I think we've lost, in a sense, when we talk about like new forms of communication, we've lost, in a sense, that connection between the written word and the self. So a Center for Writing and Communication is going to sort of remind people of that dissonance or of that gap, and to help close it. You're wondering how Center for Writing and Communication helps deal with this issue of fast communication today.
Overall communication, I think. avoiding the miscommunication or ability to communicate, whether it's feelings, whether it's a business transaction, doesn't matter. I think that's a skill set that we believe we've lost. You see people going their silos. And how does creating a center like that, does that help? Does that allow people, like you said, it's a safe space? Does it allow them to be able to communicate their feelings or emotions or instructions?
Yes, and I've run into several, I have had several experiences where it seems as though certain lines are being crossed into something that resembles more of a therapy session than a tutoring session. But this is really okay because it's important, and I think this also relates to high school education. In my high school, there was a writing center. That was my first introduction to the writing center. And I already understood it as a place to go and just get better as a writer. I have always, in a sense, been a writer since there's a photograph of me at the age of 5 with a poem that I had written about a kite. And writing for me has always been the most sort of exact form of self-expression. So I really understand the weight of it and the importance of it. So this is absolutely a place where students or people can come and yes, share their feelings. I mean, we keep it to the topic at hand, but really to become better at representing themselves. And I have seen a lot of success in students. Some students come in for technical reasons. They come in because they, number one, have no confidence in their English, but number two, have real problems with their English, either with grammar, syntax, or what have you. And we'll have mock sessions. We'll have mock conversations, basically, where the student is to take on the role of a particular character. And there's something about that disconnect that allows the student to become much more comfortable, actually, in expressing themselves. And so we bridge that gap in that way as well. Just to give a kind of framework to a Center for Writing and Communication, the vision I have for building a center at Atria is that it consists of 5 to 10 consultants or tutors, that it is open quite long hours. I'm talking from, let's say, 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. most days, that during exams and more tense times, the center can be open for 24 hours actually. That we offer individualized help and also group help, that other faculty can bring their classes in, let's say in a business management course, how to write a business proposal. And there'll be a day-long workshop on writing a business proposal. It basically, it covers almost everything in every way that we communicate, essentially. And so it is a critical space in that regard.
This is a question that we personally have been asking ourselves, and I'm sure everybody is thinking about this. Technology is changing at such a rapid pace. Everything's changing so quickly. What do you really teach a student? I mean, what in the university, when you're thinking about something, what are we supposed to teach them? I mean, that's something that we've been asking ourselves, and when we're designing this, what course do we teach them? What specialization? Because we believe by the end of those 4 years, whatever we've taught them would be outdated. So, how do you cope up with that? How do you keep up with this change and keep it relevant and make these 4 years actually useful for the students?
Yes, this is a difficult problem. I know we think about this in our curriculum as well in the US. But I think this being engineering, I think it ought to be broader than that. It should be more holistic. And engineers in general, we design and build most objects we use on a day-to-day basis in life. But it's really not all we do. And so I think to make it broader, we really need to that first year of foundational courses, I think we do need to focus on some general education aspects and writing skills. One of the things that I notice, particularly Indian graduate students, when they come to the US, is they're very poor writing skills. And so I think to prepare them from a broader perspective, we had to have some fundamental classes in the first year because that feeds on all the other classes. And those skills, I think, will help them later to be competitive. So just to start this discussion, for example, I just wrote down the type of courses that the first year students take in University of Florida. I don't think it's that different in many other public universities. So for example, the very first thing that they take, that engineering students take, is what is the good life, for example. And I'm not sure what to start there, but I know they take this. What
is a good life?
What is a good life? Okay. It is a required class for all incoming freshman engineering students. And everybody actually, not just engineering, okay? And I'm not sure what to start, as I said, but they all incoming freshmen take this. So this alludes to what Sundar was saying, what is the good life? I remember he made a point. And so something like this I think would be interesting. And so for example, they also take composition and writing class. And then professional communication for engineers is another class that they take in the later semester, second semester. And so they take 4 other courses in social and behavioral sciences. I mean, they do have a list of classes that they can take, it's not just one. They do have several options, but I think, these sorts of things allow them to think from a broader perspective. And you mentioned, what are the courses that are useful, so maybe, I think some of these courses are not necessarily directly useful at all, but I think it allows them to think in different ways. And maybe that's a good thing to learn, some of the mathematics classes, a lot of what we do is applied mathematics, but not necessarily directly useful, but I think it helps them to think in various abstract and practical ways, and so that is useful. And so the foundational classes, which I think would be pertinent here as well, see, for example, the students, almost all students in engineering, they take science and mathematics classes. They take 7 courses. This is chemistry, general chemistry, chemistry for engineers, and a couple of calculus classes and 3 or 4 physics classes, for example. And we don't necessarily directly use them in engineering, but then they're required to do it because I think it helps them to think in abstract ways. And once they do get into engineering, then maybe it's a little bit more centered. And so I think a grounding on these types of classes, I think would help them to with a broader perspective. Maybe it's more more durable. Their knowledge allows them to cope with other aspects later. And when I talked to some of you people in this past summer, you're also wondering what should be the foundational courses in the first year, for example, which then feeds to all the other programs. I think, it may seem like it's a lot, but I still think it would be useful. And the specific courses later, once they have the right background, I think they can adapt to changes once they leave the school. But I think these would, help them in good stead.
Perfect, thank you. I agree with you. I think giving a broader foundational course allows the student a little more open mind.
That's right. And because I noticed some of the engineering students who come to grad school, their backgrounds are very specific and it's very poor in terms of broader thinking, and writing skills are poor. And maybe because they don't read much either, something outside of their subjects. So I think it will help to broaden their perspective. They may or may not appreciate it right away, but I think eventually they're hoping that they will.
Dr. Shri, you are in an interesting space, a space that we can't get out of now. The human and technology interaction. I mean, today we sit across the table and message each other. We forgot how to communicate, so I don't think we're getting away from that anymore. So, how do we use technology today to solve social problems? That's something that you're working on. It'd be interesting to get your view on that.
So that's a great question. So I think it really starts with how we explicate technology. right? So back in the day with Gutenberg, right, the printing press was a technology, right? So what we've generally seen is the convergence of technology, every new technology, right? So, you know, the printing press was a big technology at that time. Then we had print, you know, the dissemination of mass print, and then we had radio, and we had television. And over the last 20 years, you know, we've seen this exponential growth where we're talking about the rise of immersive technology. So we talk about AI, we talk about different ways in which data is being proliferated. But we also talk about these different platforms which have blurred the line between what is real and what is really virtual, right? So that's why we're looking at it in terms of how modern technologies, we can really be immersed in it, right? There's so many different examples, but in the interest of time, I would choose to focus on virtual and augmented realities. It's a watchword, everybody's using this term. So the question which comes up is, how can we use these technologies in order to solve social issues? So let me pose a question to all of you, right? So we're all educationists here, and these are some of the questions we all grapple with when we talk to our students, when we talk about it in terms of the next generation. So how do you convince an 18-year-old or a 17-year-old, or even younger than that, that the rate at which they are smoking now, they're going to be contracting cancer 30 years down the line, right? It's a formidable challenge, right? So in the US we have data, billions of dollars being spent on anti-drug PSAs, anti-smoking PSAs, they're just not effective, right? Think about it in terms of the rate at which we are raping and ravaging the environment, right, globally, right? So that's a huge issue. So if we tell somebody that the rate at which we are doing so, the world around us is not going to look like this. In 30 years down the line, it's going to resemble the world out of Mad Max. How many people are really going to get that, right? In other words, the human brain is not conditioned to process something which it cannot experience. So one of the chief ways in which you can think about solving some of these so-called social issues is to think about it in terms of the importance of perspective taking. So there are two things which I believe, which many of us who work in this realm, we believe are important. One is the importance of being able to slip into the shoes of the other. So for many of us here, right, we don't know what it is to be homeless, right? We're all fortunate enough to be in places where we have a roof over our heads. So we don't really know what it is like to be homeless. So how can you hope to implement policy or behavioral change when you have no clue on what this really means, right? So these are some of the issues that we're getting at, right? So related to that, why is this perspective taking so important? It is really important when the important component of empathy needs to be elicited, right? So there are a lot of times you might be the kindest, you might be the nicest person around, but it's still very difficult for you to empathize with somebody, right? So if I asked you to put yourself in the shoes of someone who's truly homeless, you really cannot do that. If I ask you to think about it in terms of what it is that a person with schizophrenia goes through 24/7, you cannot do that. Where you can make a difference now is to look at some of these important social issues and then create these types of experiences where you allow someone to slip into the shoes of the other, so to say. Right? So I can create an experience where you slip on a headset, for example. In this case, we're talking about a headset creating an experience where you look at it in terms of how a smoker's body will be. So that's something which we have actually done, right? So you put somebody in the shoes and then they actually see how their own body is susceptible to different medical issues over a period of time. We call this the accelerated future. We've done this in terms of like climate change. We take people below the ocean, right? So we take below the ocean and then we show them, here is how ocean acidification is destroying ocean life and everything else beneath. And here is how you can actually experience this. So what's happening is you are actually in the position of that particular specimen, right? So, and there are so many different ways in which you can do that. How can we talk about the importance of conservation, right? So we talk about it in terms of what happens with chopped trees, right? So we make someone actually chop trees in the virtual world, and then we look at it in terms of what would be some actual behavioral metrics and outcomes, right? So that's where these new technologies really have such a huge role. Number one, they can allow you to assume the perspective of the other. Second, they can elicit empathy. Most importantly, because of these conditions, it can actually lead to proper behavioral change. So one example of when we make people actually chop trees in the virtual world, one clear outcome that we measure as behaviors is to see reduced consumption of toilet paper. So people are actually becoming much more conscious about that. Right? So we've done a similar one with sugar consumption. So we make people see what happens to their bodies as a result of consuming excess sugar, right? Overconsumption of sugar. Then we see that different parameters in the body just go up. Okay, so they become medically ill, so to say. And then we see that leads to reduced consumption of sugar over time. So these are ways in which we are looking at how the important social issues. And what we also do is, we make it very clear that whenever these elements are important, perspective taking and empathy are important, then using some of these immersive technological solutions can really be like a game changer.
One last question, any one of you could take this. And also, in the interest of time, we'll be opening up the floor for questions after this. So if any of you have questions, you can start making those notes on that. One of the questions, I think, with having all the principals of schools here, something that they'll be asked very regularly from students. How does a student really pick a particular domain when they're getting out of school, right? You have a few months between when you finish school to choose what you want to do next. How does this student go about really figuring that out in such a short span of time at an age of 16, 17 years? Really asked to make a decision for the rest of your life. Not many people have the opportunity to change the path after they go down that. So how does a student really go about figuring that out?
Well, at Carleton, you don't have to declare your major till your sophomore year. So, one of my favorite things about Carleton was my first term teaching there, one of the brightest kids in the room. I was waiting for him to declare the major. I didn't see him for a few weeks. I thought, okay, come around a few months. Then later he declared not in physics. I thought, okay, so what is Aaron doing? He was a studio art major with a second possible degree in computer science that he didn't bother doing. He was easily the best student in physics. And he's perfectly happy designing stuff on computers now. But he had no idea what he wanted to do. He was forced by the breadth requirements to take classes all over the place. He was just having fun. And, that's a luxury and a privilege to go that way. And there are very few people who really do it that way. But it is technically possible. I of course declared physics at age 16 or whatever it was, and I've done that the rest of my life. I don't know. I don't think anyone has that kind of luck.
I can just say from my own experience that I also had a first year of general coursework. I knew immediately that biology and mathematics were not my cup. And yet, I chose my major in the second year, but I changed it. And it cost me an extra year of university to change the major. It's not the most critical thing to have happened. But yeah, how a person can actually make this decision at that age, considering all factors, I don't know. But this seems to be one way of coping with it.
You'd open up for questions if anyone has any.
I have a question about the writing and communication program. I don't know if you face this in Ashoka University, but I know that in Nazim French University, often one had to encounter students who have not been exposed to even writing grammatically correct English. They are thinking in their mother tongue, got into writing complete sentences correctly. So did you face that, and if you did, how did you deal with it in Ashoka University?
I didn't face that in particular at Ashoka. This most likely had to do with the writing requirement of the admissions process. So I believe, where is Aman, sir? Is he here?
No, he's not here.
And someone else from, anyway, so I didn't face it there. Where I did face it was in Chicago, actually. And these were mostly with students of technology, harder sciences, who couldn't write. it's a very diverse student body there. So you have students literally coming from all different countries, coming to study, as many Indians do, and then going back. You're right to note that, okay, you talk about a business proposal, but what about that complete sentence? And the center, at its base, really, can teach writing, the building blocks. And some students may come in because their English, they feel their English is very poor and they just want to have a conversation. And they come and the sessions are generally 50 minutes and they have a conversation for 50 minutes to just improve their communication. So it's also working at that base level of teaching language.
I'm really impressed by what you are developing or have developed, as I understand. Now, please forgive my ignorance, but is this technology available to the common man, or is it still not available?
That's actually a great question. We've seen a lot of exponential rapid development even in the last 3 years. So I was at the University of North Carolina, and then I moved to Florida 5 years ago. And even around 4 or 5 years ago, when I was setting up my lab, decent middle of the run space, not a great lab, not very basic too, but somewhere in the middle of the run, right, middle tier. It would approximately be in the range of around $60,000 to $70,000, right? I can get all that I could propose then, I could get that for around a tenth of that price now. So you raise a really important question, not just in terms of the accessibility is another issue, right? So one of the reasons why it was so difficult to really conduct these studies and also get grants, and it's difficult to go to policymakers and say that we need this in order to bring about behavioral change if it's technology is not accessible at all, right? But there's been more development in the immersive technology space in the last 2 years than the previous 18 years combined. So now you can experience this. First you needed these really large specialized rooms, okay, till as recently as 5 years ago. Then you needed these very powerful computers, desktops, and then some specialized laptops. Then it started getting tethered to your smartphone, right, with a simple headset. Now you don't even need a smartphone. So now you're having some of these standalone systems which are now available for around $100 or something like that, right? So it's starting to become much more accessible. We already see a lot of startups even in India. There's research is starting to be done here. So we are actually conducting some studies where we are actually going across schools to conduct some of these studies too. So that's actually another huge advantage when you think about how this could be a game changer. Because even traditionally when you think about it in terms of data collection efforts, right, you normally bring people to a space and then you collect data. Here you can actually take the technology and actually go conduct it. So it actually gives you much more of a real world setting too. So that's a somewhat detailed, elaborate response to the fact that it's becoming more and more accessible, and I predict that within the next 5 years, this is going to be somewhat analogous to a smartphone, the penetration rate.
Yeah, because as you said, technology where you could take technology to smokers and tell them how their body would react and things. I mean, it would save so many lives.
Yeah, I mean,
as long as you don't let tobacco companies inhibit your progress.
The reason why I'm so bullish on this is this is the only technology I've seen where typically when we talk about interventions, right? We talk about it in terms of print, we talk about radio, television, but we rarely see the extent of behavioral outcomes that we see with this technology. So that's where I think there's a huge potential for policy change, and I think it would especially work well in India. And those are some of the things that we've been speaking about in terms of how we could work with local communities at Atria. So that's something which, Sundar, Shilpa, Shine and Kaushik will be talking about some of these. And, so we are hoping that, these are some of the issues that we can take up with the local government, identifying those issues which are crucial to the local environment as well, and see how we can harness the power of some of these technologies.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for taking out time and flying out all the way here and being with us on this day. I hope it's been useful for all of you.